Hi everybody, I am going to walk you through the Introduction to Ecology notes, which is Chapter 3 in your textbook, Section 1. So follow along and fill in as I do mine. Starting with ecology, the definition of ecology as defined by your textbook is the scientific study of the interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environment. Eco is a prefix that comes from the Greek word oikos. And oikos means house. So ecology is defined as the study of nature's houses. And the organisms that live within them. Scientists talk about life on a global scale. All areas where life exists on Earth is called the biosphere. And I'll come back to biosphere in a little bit. It is one of the levels of organization that we talk about when we discuss ecology. And the biosphere includes land, water, and the atmosphere. Now, speaking of those levels of organization, ecologists can study a wide variety of things in the environment. They might focus on a very specific type of organism, or they might be looking at biomes, just depending upon what their level of research is. But the lowest level of organization is looking at an individual organism. And a species is defined as a group of organisms that are so similar they can produce offspring together. So you might have somebody who specializes in, let's say, studying black bears. Now, a little bit more broad than studying an individual organism is studying a population of those organisms, and that is defined as studying a group of individuals of the same species that are within a given area. So, for example, you might be studying black bears in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Still broader is looking at communities. And a community is not just all the members of a species in a given area, but it's all of the populations in a given area. So it's defined as how different populations interact with each other in a given area. So you'll have your population of black bears, but also your rabbits and the grass and the trees and your Baltimore Orioles and whatever else is in that given area. But keeping in mind that a community, all of these things need to be alive. We're not talking about anything that is not alive, none of the abiotic factors. And I'll come back to abiotic factors at the end of these notes. Still broader is an ecosystem. And now it's the ecosystem that takes into account the living and the non-living factors. So ecologists who look at ecosystems look at a collection of all organisms in a particular place. Sorry, there's not enough room there. This also includes their interaction with the non-living environment. So, not only do you have all of your communities, you also have the non-living factors like water and temperature and weather and soil composition, etc. If you take into account all of the ecosystems all over the world that are similar, you then have a biome. So a biome is a group of ecosystems that have the same climate and similar dominant communities. So for example, you might have deserts, and you have deserts in Africa, you have deserts in the Middle East, you have deserts in Asia, you have deserts in the United States. They're not exactly the same, but they have similar kinds of organisms, similar precipitation, similar temperature ranges, and interestingly enough, you will often find similar biomes along similar latitudes on Earth, and that has to do with precipitation and weather patterns, which we're not going to get into here. Finally, when you put all of the biomes together, you get the biosphere, which I mentioned earlier. It is the highest level of organization, which includes all biomes. Now, ecosystems can be influenced by a combination of living and non-living factors, or I should say biological and physical factors. The biological influences that are alive are called biotic factors. Biotic factors are all living and once living factors in an environment. So if, for example, given a forest, the biotic factors here would be anything that would be alive. Trees, maybe if there's some grass, a squirrel, a deer, a bird, and things that you might not think of, but like bacteria, fungi, etc. Abiotic factors are the physical or non-living factors that shape an ecosystem. So abiotic, when you put it A as a prefix, it means not, so not biotic. Abiotic factors in that same forest would be the soil, but I don't necessarily mean the bacteria or the worms that are in the soil, but just the soil composition itself, precipitation, humidity, rainfall, sunlight. And the abiotic factors are going to influence your biotic factors, and in turn, your biotic factors sometimes can influence the abiotic factors. Maybe not sunlight, but the growth of a tree would affect the amount of sunlight that gets into the understory of the forest. So the amount of living things that are dying or eating and creating waste will influence your soil composition, etc. So that's it for these notes. Hopefully you're able to follow along. And if you have any questions, I will be able to field them later this week, either via Zoom or via email.